Well, thank you all. Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to share some of the experiences that have occurred to me in the last 10 years. I want to thank Jeff, Dr. Hughes, for inviting me here to speak to all of you. And I want to thank Tom Lang. It's really nice to see Jerry Al and so many familiar faces, and some of my family are here. It's really wonderful. To begin, I'd like to probably just dive right in. It might get a little heavy and it might seem a little out there. Just try to stay with me. I'm going to try to be very informal and conversational about most of what I'm going to talk about. And then hopefully it can get a little bit looser, and we'll just cruise through a lot of images that will hopefully draw some oohs and ahs if I'm lucky. And then I'll get into some of the stuff that I'm working on more currently and where I hope to go in the future from there. And then I will try not to take more than 30 or 40 minutes. I don't want to bore anyone, and I know it's time for lunch. But I would like for you to feel encouraged to ask me some questions. So if a thought comes into your mind that you'd like to ask me, I can't see you all very well necessarily, but keep those thoughts in mind, and then when there's an appropriate time, by all means, don't hesitate to ask. So I'm going to just get started right away with just a little video to get us in the mood, and then we'll see how that goes. So what you're looking at are latex balloons. Thousands and thousands of latex balloons. And these images are a series of wearable sculptures. I began making sculptures that were wearable because I wanted to engage people directly. I wanted to surprise people and capture their imagination, and maybe even give them a start right in the street or in a place where they would least expect it. And sometimes during an odd day of the week that otherwise would have no reason to be running into something so bizarre in that place. And in the process of making these things over the last 10 years, I continue to use them as a component to a lot of shows. And so if I have an opportunity to create a huge installation, in addition to the work that I'll be making at whatever institute that will occur, I like to make a wearable sculpture or a couple and take them out to an iconic location and get a photograph of them, and on the way there or on the way back, try to attack people with these things. The work is, and it came from the idea of guerrilla art, and was inspired early on by artists like Keith Haring, who went right into the New York City subways and made drawings on the chalkboards or on different posters and things. He did that for a very long time, and his work was easily recognizable, and it propelled him into galleries and museums and into an amazing career that ended all too soon. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of artists like him because I wanted to engage a general public. I wanted people who were on their way to their miserable jobs that they just couldn't stand going to. I wanted to capture some element of joy and share that with people who would otherwise not expect to see it there. And in doing that, maybe affect their potential for future occurrences with art. As a lot of you will learn very soon, the world at large, especially in the United States, is terrified of art. It's everywhere, and it's in everything that we do and we use and we see, and we need it to communicate. But people are afraid of art. As soon as you talk about art, oh, I don't like art, or oh, that contemporary stuff is weird, or my kid could do that. So So I wanted to make something that could help people go beyond that, bridge that gap, so that those who are afraid might let their guard down. And maybe a paradigm shift could occur in their brain. Maybe some new neural pathways could be formed. And instead of their day-to-day occurrence going from point A to point B as they do every day and see only the mundane, expected things that they normally see, something else happened. And that little trigger occurrence creates a quantum shift in their reality and opens up the potential for more of those kinds of things to happen. And then later they might discover what they saw was art. And then maybe they won't be so afraid to see it again. And for me, this helps me believe that art is not just selling some cars or some jeans or whatever, but maybe it's helping people to escape the constant compulsive thoughts that are happening in their mind. And I'll get to that point in just a minute. Let's cruise through some of these images. Now, these wearable sculptures get a little freaky sometimes, and for good reason, because we're kind of freaky. And so when I make these things, I'm interested in maybe making something slightly suggestive, something playful, but also something that will be in scale to our proportions and will have a very specific kind of effect. I've had some amazing opportunities. I created a huge installation for the new museum gala just as they were opening their new museum space in the East Village in New York City. I had the opportunity to create some sculptures that occurred in different museums all over the world. And they started out very kind of rudimentary. I wasn't sure what I was doing. It was all experimental. And when you see here, this form is kind of a single wall construction, just a bunch of balloons kind of twisted together like you would weave a sock. But then later, I started to learn how to create this sort of double wall construction, and it allowed me to almost kind of engineer these things, to start to introduce a curve, start to grow a shape. This form, you saw the green one, happened in a museum in California and was so successful that I wanted to try it again. And so I made a piece with some really bizarre colors for the Pulse Art Fair in New York City. I believe this was 2005. It hung over the cafe. When Art in America did the art review for all of the art fairs that year, the only mention the Pulse Art Fair got was about this piece, and they called it an unappetizing addition over the cafe. What are you going to do? This was a piece at Heron College in just outside of Chicago, and I included this photo here so that you could not just get a sense of the scale, but how happy this lady was that it was here. She loved it, and I was really thrilled with it too. Now, these things don't just happen by themselves or with just me, a whole team of people. And so a lot of times when I visit a university, I'll have a dozen students who will hopefully volunteer several hours a day and will work their fingers literally to the bone, inflating thousands of balloons, and in the process learn certain techniques in order to make these things happen in a very short time, just a few days. This happened at Tennessee Tech University, and I think I had, for this one, I didn't have a set team. Instead, I had multiple classes showing up each day, anywhere from 16 to 19 students. And I had to learn very quickly how to manage the chaos of 19 college students who had never done anything like this, and not just keep them from trying to flirt with each other or waste a lot of time, but to sort of really pay attention and concentrate and make these things happen. And they called this their jewel box, and it was a room inside of a new building that was really beautiful, so I was thrilled to have the chance to build these sculptures there. This is a show in Oklahoma City at the Contemporary Arts Center, and this is part of that show. This is a show in Philadelphia in a space called the Skybox. And what is difficult to see at first, the windows up the top There's long hallways on either side, and there are studios there. And this is a community studio building. A lot of artists rent space there, and then they have this massive, massive space where they create exhibitions. And so originally, when the space first opened, I was contacted by a curator who asked me if I could create an installation that would fill up the space. And of course, I said yes, although I had no idea how I was going to do it. I just had to kind of figure it out. The piece was called Titan and the Fireflies. And a lot of times my titles are whimsical and sound like some kind of terrible romance novel, but I can't deny who I am. This was a piece commissioned by TED, and so TED occurs each year out in Long Beach, California, and I believe this piece was called Nucleotide. And this shot might give you a sense of the scale of the piece. It was about 3 stories high, and I created this in 5 days with 2 assistants. It was, I just couldn't believe how hard they worked and how hard we worked. Here's a piece that's in Selfridges, which is a department store in London. For some reason, Great Britain seems fascinated with my work, and I find myself flying to London a couple of times a year. I don't know why. I think it's because they have great taste. I was invited before the Hong Kong Art Fair was purchased by Art Basel, they were kind of just getting going, and it was their second year, and they were operated by a group from London, and they invited me to create a massive piece in the convention center where the art fair would take place. I love to put this photo in because it shows its scale compared to Paul McCarthy's giant ketchup bottle. His bottle is 60 feet tall, and the sculpture that I made was this crazy giant brown form that was 60 feet long, and you see these long appendages that it had out front. I like to think that it really wanted to straddle that bottle. And it constantly stayed pointing at it, although it could have turned 360, it never did. It's kind of weird. But this one required a lot of help, and a lot of students who were attending university in Hong Kong came out to help on that one too. And the pieces continue to get more complex. And when I have a big space, and when I have the time, and when there's the budget, and when there's all of the help to make something happen, I try to really push the limit. I try to make something that challenges me and maybe gives me a chance to be terrified. Terrified that the whole thing will just fall apart. Maybe it won't work. I think it'll work. I've come this far, and what I've learned helps me believe that it will work, but I'm not sure. In this one, I wanted to create a giant 60-foot spiral that would hang in an 80-foot atrium space in a museum in Los Angeles. I'm sorry, San Diego. Well, it started to work. It was working, but at about day 3 of a 6-day build, I got scared and thought I was doing it the wrong direction, and I changed direction. And then the spiral changed direction. It turned out beautifully. Nobody knew that I didn't mean for it to change direction and do this. But the thing was so big, you might notice that I had to splice 2 photographs together in order to get the entire thing in frame. I don't know if that little bar will go away. You have to look at it. But the piece was really phenomenal. And in making this, maybe I'll use this as a segue back to what I mentioned before about how I believe this work can help stop or interrupt that stream of constant compulsive thoughts that is occurring to all of you right now and almost all of mankind at all times. It's the thoughts that keep you awake at night because of what you didn't get done today or what you have to do tomorrow. It's the constant stress because of the fight you had with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, or the fight that you had with your parents, or whatever. And we can all say what we want is peace, but then when the phone rings and the deal is broken, or the car is broken down, and we all flip out. Well, our compulsive thoughts are taking over our body, over our emotions, taking over everything that we do and occurs in our life and in our bodies. What I believe is, you all probably have heard the term, and maybe some have experienced the concept of being in the zone. When you're an artist and you're working, and you really get into the work, and some of us like to work late at night, and you forget about the past, and you forget about the future, and all there is this one moment that we're working, and we're really connected, and we're absolutely present in the project that we're working on. Or maybe if you're an athlete, and you've just run 3 miles or 4, and everything melts away, and all there is just breathe and take a step, and breathe and take a step. Well, in that state, we are so connected to the consciousness that is flowing through us, through this present moment. We are connected. And in bringing a piece of work into the world that nobody could predict that they're going to see this, everyone is going to be surprised. And if it turns out even close to what I hope, people are going to be in awe. And in that one moment of awe, we might have to reevaluate everything we've ever learned. When you come in contact with something like this and it's 5 stories high, and your brain says, there's nothing there. And now instantly we have to start trying to label, what is this like? What have I seen that this is? What are these made of? What is happening here? And then right back come those compulsive thoughts, because we're not always in control of our brain. When we're watching TV, the TV is in control of our brain, and we get a moment of rest from thinking, but the TV is now guiding our thinking. Well, here, art is doing something similar, and it's giving us a chance to see some great potential. These are just balloons, but connected in this framework, in this series, they transcend their simple nature. They're not just a child's toy anymore. They become something transformational, something transcendental. And I believe that in that moment, even if subliminally, it helps us all to recognize that potential in our own lives. And so when I can make you go, ah, maybe at that moment, there's a brief cessation in the stream of compulsive thinking, and once again, the neural network in your brain can begin to realign for greater possibilities tomorrow and the next day. I made that sort of spirally thing, and when I realized what I did wrong, I wanted to do it again. I had an opportunity to build another piece in a convention center, not that glamorous, in Oklahoma City. Because of the show that I had had there at the Contemporary Art Center, some corporate types got into touch with me and they said, hey, we would really love for you to make some amazing stuff. We're having something similar to TED here in Oklahoma City. And so I have to eat, I have to pay my bills. And when I was a student, I would have said, what a sellout. No way, no corporate art is going to get me. Well, the reality is, I thank God every day when the corporations contact me for work. Because whenever I do something for a museum, there's a small honorarium at best. But whenever a corporation contacts me, they pay. And when I receive a payment like that, I consider it a victory for all of you, all of artists everywhere. There is this absurd notion that artists need to suffer. And I think that that's absolute bullshit. It's bullshit. You don't have to suffer. Instead, what you have to do is find a way to stop that stream of compulsive thinking and work and be in the moment. Be present with what it is you're doing. And in doing so, you will bring forth that unmanifested realm, that dimension that all of us need to experience more frequently. And in doing that, you might bring about a lessening of the crazy, compulsive human ego, which I agree and believe is the devil. And in doing that, I think that we can all make a better world for ourselves, for our neighbors, for our communities, for our families. So I thought this piece turned out interestingly. It wasn't as grand as that big yellow one that you saw, which was called Quetzalcoatl. I don't think this one even had a title. This was a piece called Agartha. In that same museum where the yellow spiral was, I did a residency there, and I went back every 4 months. And they would allow those pieces to completely deflate and deteriorate before I would come back and replace it with a new one over the course of about 2 years. This piece was just a phenomenal success, and I think there were a half a dozen of these huge nest forms, and then some other kinds of things that tried to just really fill up the space. And then I was contacted by Bergdorf Goodman. They were interested in having me make stuff for their windows. And a lot of people might say, well, what is an artist going to do in some department store windows? But when I saw the history of all of the artists like Jeff Koons and Andy Warhol and other amazing types who had made the most brilliant things in those windows, I was terrified. How am I going to make anything that could compete with all of that? But I said yes, and I was amazed at what I was able to make happen in those windows. This is just one. There were several, and they actually produced a book including all of the artists that they were proud of having ever installed in their windows. And I'm happy to say that my work is in that book, but I don't have it with me, of course. And they allowed me to make some sculpture in the store. And if I move this away, you can see that I got a little bit cheeky with it. And I had a piece hanging low below this weird sculpture that I gutted. And then I had this goofy balloon coming between this mannequin's legs with a spotlight right on the tip of it, just to kind of make it a little raw and weird and unexpected. Because why not? And this was at Islip Museum out on Long Island. And for this project, I shredded the balloon. I just tore it to shreds and I flung paint all over it. And I just really turned it into a horrific mess. And then on it, I projected High Plains Drifter on one side and It's a Wonderful Life on the other. You might need to know what those movies are to get the symbology of that combination, but it was a show for Christmas, and everybody else was making Christmas trees, and I made this, and I used movies that I thought really summed up what Christmas was about for me. The Guggenheim called. It was amazing. There's a group who's been commissioning theatrical work in the theater at the Guggenheim for 30 years. And they asked me if I would create an installation in the theater for their production of Peter and the Wolf, which is narrated by Isaac Mizrahi. I created a giant moving mobile. So all of these pieces are in pairs, suspended off of long bamboo poles, so that they were constantly moving and then floating all around over the audience. And so as we were all watching Isaac on stage, we're seeing this mobile move all around. It was like being a baby again. It was great. I really enjoyed doing it. Here is looking up at, if you're familiar with the story, there's a duck which gets eaten by a wolf. And so in my interpretation, the piece in the top was the duck, and this crazy looking thing was the wolf. It looked more ferocious in real life. This was a small library in Ute Pass, Colorado, and they gave me this tiny little space to make something. Well, to me, a space like this is tiny because the work grows so quickly. And so I made what I call a reading womb for them. And it took thousands of balloons in this lattice structure, and they were all stuffed in there, kind of like you've seen those soda bottle houses made. And the inside was remarkable. Now, this inside here was only about 200 square feet, but there was room for a dozen kids to sit around and read books for a month. And it helped me to figure out how to do this on a grander scale, which you'll see again soon. Also in Ute Pass was a delightful little church, and this is the pastor of the church. I made a piece called Alpha Omega. And what you can't see at the back window is the symbol for the Alpha Omega, and it's part of something that he uses in his sermons on a regular basis, which is the unification of the feminine and the masculine to create a balanced lifestyle. And I really loved this guy. He really had it figured out, and he shared all of his passion with his parishioners, and I had the chance to enjoy Sunday Mass sitting right under this, the end part of it. It was really a fantastic experience, and I felt honored to have the chance to do something in such a spiritual place. Some of you might recognize Martin right in the middle. This was here at Webster University not too long ago. I made some pieces for the opening of the new, tell me the name of the building again? Say? The East Academic Building. How could I forget? A beautiful space, and I was thrilled to have the chance to make this piece. And here's an amazing photo. There's someone here named Innocent Bach. I don't know if he's here in the room, but he took these amazing photos and shared them with me. and now I'm sharing them with you. And I don't know who this goofy guy is down here at the bottom, but that piece was, I think that was putting the final piece in this sculpture. You can see that I employ a gradient often in the work, and I think that that's for a number of reasons. This work is intended to have movement, and it's intended to inspire movement. Buddha tells us that life is the dance, and I want the work to illustrate that. And so I believe that there's a rhythm, a cadence in this work, and it has a buoyancy. And so the lower piece that you see here was suspended free below the upper piece, and it turned separate from it inside there. It was a really special piece. This is another piece in a space in Hong Kong at Savannah College of Art and Design. They gave me this staircase and said, "What can you do?" And I said, "Well, how about if I make people walk up through this thing?" And they said, "Okay." I can't get over my luck. And around that time, I received a grant from the Pollock Krasner Foundation. And if any of you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to find out what it is, and I encourage you to apply immediately. It's a tremendously giving kind of organization. They're all about supporting the arts, and I explained to them in my proposal that I was interested in taking a year off from traveling constantly, making large sculptures with latex balloons that quickly deflated, for the opportunity to stay in my studio for a year and make an exploration in more permanent materials. And they said, "What a great idea." And they gave me the money, so I spent a year doing that. And I had experimented with some sculptures in plywood, which I actually exhibited one of those pieces here at Webster years back in the Hunt Gallery. And this is a continuation of that. And while I was at it, I started taking some of the two-dimensional drawings that became these forms and started using them to create paintings and make those concepts become a two-dimensional form as well, and as a finished piece. And I can't necessarily say that the paintings are great, but they certainly were a wonderful experience to try to do, especially on a 5 by 8 foot scale. So you see them in the background, and you see these sculptures, and you can see how clearly they relate to one another. But still, that concept of rhythm and cadence and movement is present. And these things are all suspended from a swivel so that they can turn 360. One of my big heroes is Alexander Calder, and so I try to keep the work sort of lighthearted, but also having it point to something that is really human in its design. And so you see that they are kind of skeletal, but those curves that are there, those are really the curves of my wrist on a 5 by 8 inch scale, or my arm on a 5 by 8 foot scale. It's a really simple transition, and so you see the drawings on the wall, and then how those drawings become these sculptures by cutting out those actual shapes from this pink foam, and then fitting them together with a center key piece, and then they suspend beautifully and they turn constantly. And then I got the opportunity to see one of these wood pieces realized. This is the Weisman Art Museum in Minneapolis. It's the Frank Gehry building. It looks like a stainless steel ribbon. This piece is 28 feet long, and it was intended to rock. And so you see that the base is curved, and the idea was that a couple of people could sit inside the cab and the whole thing would rock, or a single person could stand at the end and rock by themselves, just sitting on the end. Well, it didn't exactly work that way. Eventually the wood gave and it sagged and it just laid flat on the floor. And I wouldn't call it a complete failure because everything we do is an opportunity to learn. And so the piece is beautiful, and it all disassembles with no screws or glue. All of those pieces just fit together, pack flat, and ship easily. So it was a really exciting opportunity to do something, and you see those drawings made it into the exhibition. And so I've been making those drawings and these sculptures now for a couple of years. I've gone ahead and included some of these paintings. Now, the idea, again, is really about the movement and about the potential, expressed and unexpressed. All of the ways that we make choices. At this moment, we're making a choice, and later on, it will change how our life evolves. And so these paintings are about that, about the choice that we make to either go this way or go that way. And maybe the idea of what happens when something is a dead end, or it could have been over here, or who knows what. So really these pieces are just an opportunity to borrow what I learned in printmaking, which is really all about the line, and how can that line push the boundaries of when it becomes a shape. And then how can those shapes start to move and affect us and help us feel connected. And so as you see, there's a biological feel to these forms, although they're not intended to be anything specific. This wasn't intended to be fallopian tubes, but some people think it might look like that. This is the 5 by 8 inch scale, and these might seem more successful to some of you painters out there. I wish I could be a better painter, but I can only be what I am. So I've been making these little ones as well, and so far they've all managed to find places to go. All of the 5 by 8 foot paintings that I made ended up in the NYU hospital just this past year, and all of these little ones have also made it out the door, and I continue to make more. My reason for showing this little grid, this little square, is to show you how they mix and match and how the dialogue begins. What happens is you have these little pairs, one might mimic the other, but then when you start mixing them up and matching them in different ways, they almost become nonsensical. They might become absurd, and they might almost seem completely meaningless. And I'm not sure exactly what that means, but what I like about it is it gives me a chance to think about what I have no idea I'm thinking about and allow it to evolve and teach me something, maybe about relationships, maybe about how these forms become activated. I'm not really sure, but I am sure that I enjoy doing it, and I think that that's valid. New York Times called. They asked me to make a piece for their New York Times magazine. The cover of that magazine, they feature an artist's creation of the letter T for the New York Times. So I made this freaky, perverted-looking T for them. And they seemed to really like it, although I thought it was horrible. What are you going to do? I had been pushing around a proposal for a very long time. Anytime somebody would contact me and say, hey, we have an opportunity to do something, we'd really like to use your work, but we don't know how. What could we do? I say, well, how about if we rent some boom lifts, and I build some crazy sculptures, and we stick them on the baskets and raise them in the air, and we do these performances where they move around in response to one another. And they say, are you out of your mind? And I say, yes, I try to stay out of my mind. Get it? You see where I'm going? So somebody finally said yes, and I got the chance to try this, and you see how basic these forms are, but they were beautiful, and they were truly successful, and the booms didn't fall over and kill anybody. So that was good. And then more people called, and they said, hey, we saw those boomlet things you did. Will you make some for us? I will. How much money you got? And so I created some work for the city of Manchester, England, in the same way. And again, I felt like it was a victory for all of you artists out there, and me, and my family, because you shouldn't work for free. And for every person who works for free, you're lowering the bar for everybody else who's trying to make a living. Don't give it away. Go on strike. Hell no, we won't go. We're not doing it for free. You've got to pay us. Now, it might sound like I'm a money-grubbing maniac, but the reality is we deserve to get paid. We build up this huge debt for college, just like every lawyer and plumber out there. And when the plumber shows up, you say, hey, listen, this is going to be a great opportunity for you. I'm going to tell everybody what a good job you did clearing my pipes. No, they're going to charge you $100 an hour. You should charge too. So these were some of the sculptures that I made on boom lifts after everybody got over their initial shock. And they turned out beautifully. And the city loved it. And then I got to go to Iceland. This was in Reykjavik. And if you haven't been to Iceland, go. Go, go, go. It's amazing there. And it's so quiet. And the time that I was there was in summertime, which means it stays daylight all day. But not just daylight. All day long, it's sunset. So the sun is coming across the sky all day, and the light is so amazing, and the city is so quiet, and the people are so proud and so humble and so giving. It's an amazing experience, and I find myself, I was standing right at the edge of the city on the waterfront, and you can't hear anything. There's no trucks, there's no traffic, there's no people bustling around. I was the only one around. And here's the water, and it's just quietly lapping up against some stones, and out there are all these snow-capped mountains across the water, and the seaweed is just kind of doing this really slow movement. And I said, I want to express this moment with my work. How can I slow down this movement? And how can I affect people in a way that's more subtle than I already have? How can I do it? Well, for years I've been wrapping my sculptures with a lightweight plastic that's, at Home Depot they call it painter's plastic, but it's really a polymer film. It sounds a lot smarter that way. So I started experimenting the day I got back in my studio with painter's plastic. This is just plastic, clear tape, and maybe some sewing. There were some appendages that I created, tubes of this stuff that I was just experimenting with. What if those same pillows that you saw flying, I cut them open and I attached them to the sides to see what would happen. And these experiments quickly led to more opportunities. It was a breakthrough for me, not just artistically, but spiritually as well. Because the works, to experience them in real life, it's just overwhelming. So it quickly led to an opportunity to install them at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. Now, the Victoria and Albert is, if you don't know, similar to the Met in New York City. They have everything that's ever happened in the history of mankind in their museum. They have a gem room that you could be in for days. It's just incredible. And they have this ancient tapestries room. And they said, Jason, how would you like to make something in the tapestries room? And I said, well, okay. Look at these tapestries. These are some 2,000-year-old tapestries, and they said, just try not to touch the tapestries. Okay. Well, the floor was also an antique floor from somewhere else, so I used a special tape that is guaranteed to release without any residue. It's 6 inches wide, and you see that I made drawings on the floor with yellow string. I took what I learned about the experiments that I made in my studio with that plastic, and I stuck it to the floor. And you see how I've laid it out? And you see in the back, I've rented those yellow things. Those are lights on these weights. And you remember those punching bags, like Weebles, they wobble, but they don't fall down? That's what those were. There's lights that were a cheap rental, and I rented a few fans, I think 4 or 5 fans, and then I turned it all on. And people went crazy. It was amazing. There was a line of people out the door to get in to see this thing. And you could go inside these caverns. But again, try to keep in mind, I came from a printmaking background. Those yellow strings, those were the drawings that I made. Those are those same shapes, those same curves, only they become 3-dimensional forms again. And they move. They're constantly moving and billowing, and they're reminding us that life, this moment, is fleeting. To pay attention to what we have right here, right now. So I practiced my Jack Handy voice. Savannah College of Art and Design asked me to come and make an installation in one of their small galleries. So I made the installation and I created this video of the piece. I don't know if you can hear the narration. This was just with one fan, just a small fan fills this entire thing, and then it just keeps it moving ever so slightly. I felt like it was a real success, and I've really started to learn how to use this material and almost predict the outcome. That space that I created, the Titan and the Fireflies I mentioned before, the big yellow one, I called them up and I said, I have something I want to try in your giant space. And they said, come on out. So I went there and I created an entire labyrinth of these forms, the caverns, tunnels. From up above, you can see how the two forms that you just noticed here become openings that you go into, and they travel all the way around, and then you can enter into an even smaller one into this large chamber. But the smaller tunnel was only so high, really low. Why do you think I wanted people to be forced to crawl? Only the penitent man shall pass. We've got to get down on our knees. We need to crawl before we can walk. There's a lot of symbolism in this work, and not everybody gets it, and certainly people in skirts and high heels and fancy pants might not necessarily like it. But they're the ones I want to reach the most. And so I forced everybody in Philadelphia to crawl into this inner chamber. And when they got inside, they found a little disco ball on a motor, and they had to listen to Van Morrison playing Into the Mystic over and over and over. But it was magical, and any given moment that you went in there, there would be 15 or 20 people crowded around in awe. And the piece that I made in front of that was another one of those great big caverns. And this thing would fill up with air with this one giant fan, and then these two small fans kept the small ones afloat. And then there were two more fans in the back, you might see here, that kept that whole big cavern filled up. And I have a little video to show you the dynamics of this piece. Sometimes it would just fall almost down and then come all the way back up. And then I went to Scotland and I tried that spiral again, and this time I didn't get scared. And I made the thing a 4-story spiral that used up from the ceiling almost to the floor of the National Museum of Scotland. And some of you may have seen this on some blogs. I think it was on the press release you sent out. It got a lot of press. It was a really exciting piece for me. I had a team of helpers from the museum that helped me put it together. There were 6 of us, and we did this in 5 days, right there on the floor of the museum. I've included this shot to give you a sense of the scale of the piece. You see how tiny those people are, and where they're standing is right where that thing was built, and then it was hoisted up in that spot, and it stayed up for, I think, 3 weeks without really changing much at all. It was a really special opportunity, and the piece turned out amazingly, so much so that some people from Abu Dhabi saw it and asked me if I could come to Abu Dhabi and make something for them. This piece borrows from what I had learned in the reading room I mentioned earlier, but in this case, instead of just being this small piece, it was over 30 feet across and more than 33,000 balloons used inside this piece. It weighed 270 pounds, made of balloons. To lay underneath it, it wasn't on a motor, just a good precision swivel, and it was constantly rotating. And you could lay on the floor beneath it and look up, and it felt like the earth moving. It was really a special piece. Unfortunately, that night, the night that I unveiled the piece, they experienced the worst storm that they had had in more than 10 years, thunder and lightning and torrential rain. The whole place had 6 inches of water in there in the morning, and so it was all closed. So nobody ever really saw this piece. And then the Guggenheim called again, and they said, Jason, this is a group called Works in Process. They do the theatrical performances, and they said, we want to have our 30th anniversary gala in the rotunda, and we'd like you to make a sculpture that can be at least 30 feet tall, and you have 30 minutes to install it. I said, sure, no problem. So I built the piece in Brooklyn in a dance studio that I rented for the week, and then I brought it over in a truck in multiple trips. And basically I wove the red band, and then the orange band, and the yellow band, and the white band, and then assembled them all on the spot. And the piece, it turned out amazingly, but it wasn't anything like what I had proposed that it would be. It collapsed in the process of going up. In most cases, I'm using that double wall technique that I mentioned, but in this case, I couldn't do that because they had to be smashed flat, bundled up, and snaked through the double doors of the entrance of the museum. I only had 30 minutes. I had 30 of my artist friends who all came to the museum, got in a circle, and we hoisted the first one, and then everybody had a few attachments to make to get the second one. We raised it up, moved the next one in place, and then we raised it up a little more, and we literally installed this piece in 30 minutes. It was so phenomenal, such an opportunity to do this, and to see it hanging in the rotunda of the Guggenheim. It was a little sad for me that I had to take it down later that same night, but it was an opportunity to rub elbows with a lot of the directors of the fancy museums and people like that while I was there, and to sit beneath this thing and eat a really fancy dinner felt pretty cool. And they paid. It was good. It was a good time. And so it's a little bit different than what the original drawing had proposed it would be. The title was Aviary, and it was supposed to be like a giant bird cage, but it did fill the space, and it turned out remarkably. And I can't say that I have anything else to show you right now, but I do hope to continue what I'm doing, and I hope to find ways to push it even further and come up with new ways to challenge myself and hopefully inspire my viewers to recognize that potential in themselves, to stun the world and help everybody wake up from their sleep. Thank you all so much.